Celebrity Everyday 26.
There are a handful of icons of the first half-century of horror filmmaking, each unforgettable monsters played by talented performers who absolutely understood and over-delivered on their assignments. As the biggest name of the Universal horror cycle beginning in 1931 and running until the 1950s, Boris Karloff became best known for playing monsters, but who could have guessed in the beginning that his career would go down that path? Born William Pratt in England in 1887, the man who would become Karloff began his acting career on stage in Canada. He primarily made his living as a laborer while he trod the boards before traveling to California to be part of the incoming moving picture phenomenon, where he played numerous small roles, often as non-white characters, due to his relatively dark skin passed down from his father's half-Indian heritage. Director Howard Hawks essentially discovered Karloff's arresting screen presence when he cast him in The Criminal Code in 1930, and so the hard-working Brit was finally given a substantial screen role by the time he had already turned 40. Then, after over a decade in the industry, he met fellow British expat James Whale, who saw the actor's potential to transform and to inspire both terror and sympathy in audiences, a new Lon Chaney. While Universal's other big horror star, Bela Lugosi, was limited by his heavy accent post-Dracula, Boris Karloff was highly sought after, proved to be fairly versatile, and continued to see success on stage and screens big and small over the following 2 decades, though seldom outside of genre fare. With over 170 film credits to his name spanning 5 decades, and some of the most instantly recognizable, iconic monsters in pop culture under his belt, where should you start? Read on for the Film Magazine's recommendation for where to start with Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff in black and white as Frankenstein's monster in 1931 horror film, Frankenstein. It's incredible that the film that made Boris Karloff a star listed the monster as being played by, in the opening credits to retain the mystique. After Dracula's star and soon-to-be rival of Karloff, Bela Lugosi, turned down the role, Universal hired the British bit part player who, under Jack Pierce's ingenious makeup and with James Whale's astute direction, ended up birthing an icon. He would soon go on to be the studio's most bankable star and far eclipse his Hungarian rival. Loosely adapting Mary Shelley's revolutionary sci-fi horror novel of the same name, we follow Dr. Henry Frankenstein, Colin Clive, and his experiments to artificially create life in a Central European castle. A combination of dead men given life by channeled lightning, the monster, Karloff, escapes and in his confusion causes havoc in the nearby town, prompting Frankenstein and a mob to give chase and hunt him down. Universal's Frankenstein and the seismic impact it had on the imagination of many lovers of horror movies and monsters in particular would have been considerably lessened without Karloff's emotionally intelligent choices as a performer here. If you are being true to Shelley's original novel, Dr. Frankenstein's creation is mistreated, yes, but is also intelligent, devious, verbose, and wrathful. Karloff plays it almost entirely through his body language as a curious, abused, and confused 7-foot child. The very first time we see him, Karloff inspires our pity. The monster laboriously backs into a room and slowly turns, director James Whale having the camera zoom into his sunken-cheeked, heavy-lidded face in a shock reveal. But he is then immediately entranced by light shining through the roof, ineffectually reaching for it before Frankenstein's cruel minion Fritz, Dwight Fry, begins to torment him simply for existing. In a controversial and heavily edited scene later in the film, the monster makes a sweet connection with a little girl, Marilyn Harris, throwing daisies in a lake. But unable to fathom how the real world works, he throws the girl into the water to her death when the flowers run out, running off horrified when he realizes his mistake. Karloff plays the towering monstrosity as the ultimate innocent, a creature that was never meant to be given life, but was nonetheless thrown into a world that will never accept him. We understand that it is only natural he lashes out in an act of self-preservation. Karloff would play the monster for Universal twice more in 1935's Bride of Frankenstein, where he gave him a voice for the first time, and 1939's Son of Frankenstein, where he was inexplicably silent once more, and none of the subsequent inhabitants of the makeup would come close to his nuance when he vacated the role. He also brought Imhotep to unnatural life in The Mummy, 1932, also playing his sinister human avatar Ardath Bey. He was the shambling mute butler Morgan in The Old Dark House, 1932, before moving on to RKO and Columbia. Just as Karloff was able to impart unexpected humanity into monsters, he could also play dastardly, irredeemable villains with aplomb. Cabman by day, grave robber by night, John Gray is probably Karloff's best outright baddie. Arguably nobody working in the 1940s was better at stretching a budget than producer Val Lewton. His string of hits with sensationalist titles and striking, but crucially cheap, visuals from directors such as Jacques Turner really left their mark. Robert Wise directs this adaptation of the Robert Louis Stevenson short story set in 19th century Edinburgh, which was in turn inspired by the real criminals Burke and Hare. John Gray, Karloff, illegally supplies Professor Dr. Toddy McFarlane, Henry Daniel, with cadavers for dissection by his anatomy students. When the good doctor refuses to perform a risky operation on a paralyzed child's spine without a body to test the procedure on, Gray commits murder to supply him with his next subject. When McFarlane tries to get out of their arrangement, the Snatcher threatens to reveal the doctor's own dark past, setting an even darker series of events into motion. After his time with Universal came to an end, he would return to co-star with Abbott and Costello in the early 1950s. Karloff worked with several other studios on pretty similar fare. For Columbia, he played morally opposite aristocratic twin brothers in The Black Room, 1935. For Monogram, he played pulp detective character Mr. Wong in a series of films, and for RKO, he worked with Val Lewton on several Gothic B pictures, the best of which is probably this one. The amount of fun Karloff is clearly having in The Body Snatcher, with his gimlet grin, veiled threats, and casual attitude to anything amoral, is positively infectious, particularly when he is so abject to everyone else's repressed and buttoned-up behaviors in this Victorian-era tale. It's also amusing to see the man who previously inhabited the Frankenstein makeup is the one supplying the bodies for the scientists this time, for completely academic purposes, of course. In case you hadn't guessed yet, this is a seriously macabre movie that only gets darker as the minutes pass by and was only not considered obscene in the mid-40s because most of the horror happens off-screen or in convenient shadows.
Celebrity Every Day, 26.